I'm your host, Carolyn Solo, LCSW, EMDR therapist, and mom of 3 daughters. Thank you for joining me.
Hello, and welcome to episode 82 of the Future Template Parent Podcast. I'm Carolyn Solo, LCSW, PhD, EMDR consultant, and mom of 3 daughters. Thank you for joining me. I had a pretty intense couple of weeks just now, just launching my group program. And the first coaching call is going to take place on the last week of January. So if you're still interested in joining, there's a couple of spots left. So please reach out to me if you're thinking of joining. In any case, launching is a content creation heavy couple of weeks. Posts, reels, Instagram stories, email marketing, podcast, guests, and just doing a lot more of all of that than normally. It's a lot, a couple hours a day probably of additional content creation on top of what one would normally do. So I'm keeping today's episode relatively chill, with just a brief little chat about something that's a pillar of my marketing and something I know that causes a lot of anxiety for therapists, and that's Instagram stories. And with TikTok disappearing, that likely means that there will probably be people spending a lot more time on Instagram. So this seems like an especially timely topic. Building Instagram marketing skills, and it's also a good reminder for us not to depend solely on one type of marketing, because stuff can happen and things can be taken from us, and we have to be ready to kind of move and flex and be resilient because stuff that is out of our control. So it's been hard for a lot of people. So let's start with what even are Instagram stories, in case you're not entirely sure. Then we will talk about why I think they're important, why therapists can find them intimidating, and what my basic strategy for using them tends to look like. And some tips, maybe some things not to do. I may do a deeper dive into this at some point, and I actually have added an entirely separate lesson on Instagram stories to my group, because a lot of group members last time needed some support with them. But for now, since I'm pretty tapped out on content creation after the past 2 weeks, just some kind of barely organized thoughts on Instagram stories. So what are they, you may ask? And you may not ask, you may know this, but in case you don't, they're those little circles at the top of your Instagram page, the profile pictures of people in a circle with a little pinky orange circle around it. You click on the pinky orange circle picture, and you're going to see pictures, videos, shares of others' reels and carousels and posts. And these little clips, these stories, stay up for 24 hours before disappearing forever. That's it. That is also the one place that you can share something that you like that was posted on someone else's feed. You can share it to stories. I mean, you can also share it by a text or whatever, but you can't reshare to your actual Instagram feed, but you can share to your stories. But even more importantly, it's where you share the realer, more unvarnished you. That's what stories have come to be. Snapchat is based on the fact that everything disappears after 24 hours. And so Instagram stories kind of took that feature and made it part of their platform. It's sort of where you share the less curated content about you. It's a day in the life type stuff. It's gone in 24 hours. It's not evergreen content that someone can binge on if they go to your profile. You can save stories in your highlights in your profile if you want to, but not every single story you've ever posted. And this is where people who are your biggest fans, who are most interested in your content, will go to your stories. They want to know about the real you. They want to know more behind the scenes stuff. I've seen statistics that about 10% of your followers will watch your reels. And if you're getting those numbers, that's decent. And so on to the why. That's what Instagram stories are. But why would you use them as an intensive therapist? Basically, the why is you are selling a high ticket service, right? And one that is so incredibly personal, so incredibly vulnerable. In some ways, an intensive is asking someone to be even more trusting of the container and of the process, right? You're asking them to do a ton of work in a short time, and they might not even have met you before the consult call, right? And you're going in there with a lot of intention about this is going to be where we get things done, right? So very vulnerable. These people probably would like to understand a little bit more about who you are, understand the person behind the therapist, maybe see kind of an inside look on what the process looks like, maybe more pictures of your office or how you run an intensive. And stories give you the opportunity to do that. Um, and people who have chosen to watch your stories, right? It's an intentional choice. Stories don't just come up as you scroll. So you have to click on stories to start seeing them. So someone clicking on your story, they are already into what you do and who you are, and they want more, right? They want to see how you move through your day. What is important to you? What's your personality? And you have a lot more time in stories to talk and to go deeper, right? You can record a minute long video at a time to include in a story. And I don't know how many stories you can string together in a day. I've never come close to testing that, I don't think. So you can go into depth about your offering, your intensive, what it's like, show clips of your office, beyond what a 90-second reel will allow. And I actually think that the 60 seconds at a time format makes for easier watching than like a 45-minute recorded live or something. There are these like built-in pauses. And I certainly find them easier to record because I know like, okay, every little chunk needs to be about a minute long or less and make sense in that amount of time. I like the built-in pauses. Okay, so that's kind of why you might use them, because you're selling this high ticket service that people really want to know more about than you can just show them in a little, reel where you're just singing along to some audio. And, why do therapists find them intimidating? Several reasons. Many of us who are not Gen Z and we didn't grow up with Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, whatever, it's hard enough to learn how to create just like regular reels and static posts. So just using social media marketing as a major pillar of our practices can feel like a really heavy lift in the first place, right? Um, getting that to be something that we do. Maybe you've been in practice for 20 years and obviously social media marketing was not something you even thought about. And now all of a sudden you feel like this is what is expected of therapists. I mean, you don't have to do social media marketing, as I've said time and time again, but many of us choose to and find it, helpful. But right, so just getting the basic pieces down in the first place is what you need to do, right? You want to know how to use Instagram at all. How do you make a reel? How do you make a graphic? How do you make a static post? And there's plenty of technical elements there and conventions and styles that you have to learn and like little tricks. Um and then you kind of have to learn them for stories too. Although I will say that once you've learned them for kind of the main Instagram content, you're not learning an entirely new set of skills. It's just another kind of iteration with some variations. But anyway, once you have mastered that stuff, stories are a great place to go for personal selling. And you're selling something extremely personal. And that's another reason why therapists struggle with them, I think, because they are super, super vulnerable, right? You're getting even more behind the scenes. It's hard enough to show your face on social media when you're starting to do that. You feel silly and you feel awkward and you feel cringy, you feel exposed, and then after you've done that, it's like, oh, show your messy house, show you doing your hair, show you unscripted, getting interrupted by your kids, putting on makeup. The stuff that lots of people do in stories can feel even more scary, right? And sure, you should definitely edit and curate your stories and be intentional about what you feel like comfortable sharing. And of course, self-disclosure and all that. But we don't want to like overly edit stuff in stories, really. Like, I think people show up a little more messy in stories, and that's what makes them fun. Um, but it's scary, right? And so it totally makes sense to get comfortable with regular reels and carousels, and being seen that way first. But people who really want to invest big money in working with you will often appreciate getting to know you, right, through stories. I love watching stories. They're the most interesting part of Instagram to me, really. I love going there. I go there first. For the people I'm really interested in, I want to know, like, what are they up to? Show me. And there's other fun and useful features in stories that aren't in other places, like polls, question boxes, and links, which is so important. You can't include links in your captions or in your reels or your posts, right? And saying like link in bio can be kind of clunky. Like sometimes we'll say in a caption, like, link in bio, go to my bio to click to get to this link. That's a little clunky, right? When the link for your consult call is right in your story, it's so easy. Just click it. anything you can reduce like steps for someone to book with you, the better, right? Fewer steps always. Oh, and if you do not have a way on your website already for someone to book a consult call with you, like a widget or whatever, you need to get one. Okay. It's so important that people can be able to book a consult without calling you. Like that for me, if I can just request an appointment, an initial appointment without having to talk to somebody on the phone, I am so much more likely to do that. So you really, in this day and age, should have that option. Okay. So that's, you can use links in stories, which is huge. So, how do I use stories? Well, I've been using them mostly in my coaching practice lately, but partly because that's where I've been putting a lot more of my emphasis um, anyway in my marketing lately is the coaching. But similar considerations absolutely apply for selling a comparably high ticket service like an intensive, right? My coaching packages cost between 4 and 5K, right? And I teach therapists to book 5K, 6K intensives, right? So we're talking about a similar price point. And so there's a similar need to develop trust and establish value with your target market. Like people are not going to invest that kind of money if they don't feel like they're getting something valuable. And it takes building trust with you for them to really see that value. And stories are a great way to do that. Okay, so the method that I use when posting in stories is called the sandwich approach, which is, not too complicated. It means that you're sandwiching the meat or the meatless protein sandwich filler of your choice for you non-meat eaters. The major message you're trying to get across, that is, between the bread, right? Which is like the lighter, fluffier, more lifestyle-ish stuff. First of all, you do not have to sell in your stories every single day, okay? Certainly, I do that if I'm doing a launch of some kind, like I just did. And I do usually post something in stories every day, whether it's a pic of what I'm doing that day or a reel of someone else's that I repost or some random thoughts that I've had. So I usually post something every day. Not always on the weekends, but often on the weekends. But if I'm trying to actively sell something, and I'd say when you're selling your intensives, when you're really trying to put in a push to sell them, you want to be actively selling them at least 3 times a week, maybe more. But when I'm actively trying to sell, I'm using this sandwich approach always. And so what does this look like? Well, usually I first post some like engagement oriented content, right? To get people to like be interested in what I'm like, to be like, oh, what's Carolyn up to today? Oh, this is kind of fun, right? Like here's what I got planned for the day, or a picture of the pretty sunrise when I woke up too early with my kids, or my picture of a messy house and how I'm stressed, or whatever. Like that stuff always kind of brings people into your world. And once they're in there, they're more likely to stay and move on to the next thing, right? So you want to start with something that's like fun and engaging, but not too like heavy sales. And then in the second or third story, depending on, be the third if I have 2 funny things to talk about or whatever, or if my hair looks greater and I want to say, look at my hair, whatever it is. Sometimes I'll have 2, but definitely at least one like bread story. Then I'll post my reel of the day usually, which is, if I'm in a heavy selling period, a launch will ideally resonate with whatever kind of the theme that I'm trying to talk about in my stories is for that day. And often I'll ask some sort of a question in the story when I post the reel, like, does this resonate with you? Or have you ever, felt nervous that people won't want to book your intensive when they see the fee or whatever, right? And often there, when I ask that question, I'll put up a poll or a question box or an emoji button, whatever, to get people to engage with that question. And then, the major selling push is usually about 3 to 5 stories in a series, maybe a little more, that's talking about a specific subtopic that helps to sell my product, right? So if, for example, the subtopic for the day is why should someone invest a lot of money in coaching, right? I just did this one last week as part of my launch. And I'll go into detail about why I've done this, how it was a risk, how it's paid off, why it's worth it. And I'm telling my story, right? I'm talking about something that's vulnerable. And it's something that probably comes up for a lot of people who are thinking about investing in a high ticket service, whether it's a coaching package or an intensive, right? And if you're talking about, like, for the specific one, if you're talking about why should when a client wonders why they should invest a lot in an intensive, you might talk about, it doesn't have to be you, but you could talk kind of generally about results that you have seen and what it's like for people to make that decision and how do they feel afterwards, without obviously identifying information, but you're kind of trying to acknowledge that this is a concern that people have and use your stories to really answer that in a thorough way. And in every other story or so, you want to include a link that they can click on to get in touch with you, right? For when I'm selling coaching stuff, in every other story, usually I'll have either a link to the sales page where they can read more stuff about it, or to my consult call page if they want to book a call. For you, if you're talking about intensives, you're probably just going to include that link to your consult call. And again, make it easy. Have it in the story. They just click on it. Have it a few times so that as soon as they have that feeling of like, I feel connected to this person, they can click. They don't have to wait all the way to the end of the story series to click. They can click when they're ready to click. And, when you're coming up with this series to talk about, right, you're thinking about a story, right? You want to have a hook. You want to have some problem identification that you're talking about. You build that up a little bit and then some sort of resolution or like solution, right? Like book an intensive. I actually have a specific stories guide that I purchased that I use every time I do a launch. That's very helpful. It has a bunch of different prompts and like lays out exactly how to talk about each piece and each day. And it's very, very helpful. So I use that every time I'm doing a launch. I use the prompts there and make them different every time, but like follow the same basic structure. And then I sandwich after that something more chill, more lifestyle oriented, like what I made for dinner, or if I went out skiing that day, or what I'm excited about for the weekend, or whatever. And I usually have a couple like that at the end because you do want to give people a reason to click through the stories. And of course, they might decide, oh, I'm bored of this and click out. But the more like once people are kind of in it, the more likely they are to stay in it. So you want them to feel like there's stuff that's engaging them and that they're interested in and that they want to know, that keeps them moving through the whole series. So that's the basic idea of the sandwich method. And if we work together either in the group or in a one-to-one capacity, I can give you lots more support on how to do this, and show you how I add captions, filters, effects, links, polls, all that stuff, and how to like use those strategically. Oh, and about like engagement stuff like poll and question boxes, do not make them boring. People will not respond to ones that are boring or that feel like totally out of context. I hate those polls that are just like, do you like cake? Yes, no, maybe. Like I never answer those. And they hardly ever get any engagement. Especially if they feel like totally random and they're not connected to what you're discussing in the stories overall. The question should be kind of specific, like in a poll or a question box. And and when you're talking about a poll, the replies should make people want to pick one of them, right? They should be like a little spicy, like include an emoji, like include some spicier responses, like make it so people want to answer so they can see what others have said. You have up to 4 options in a poll, and use at least 3 and 4 if you have some fun ones. If a poll or a question is a little like funny or quirky, I'm much more likely to respond. And if you're selling something, uh, like a course, something that's not a therapy product, like a course or a freebie or clinical consultation or coaching or whatever, you can and you definitely should include social proof, testimonials, screenshots of DMs and stuff from people who have used whatever you're offering and are happy to recommend it. So using that, and I'm sure you've seen people do this in their stories, like a little screenshot of a DM of like, Janet said that her intensive practice is bringing in a 5K intensive every month. Thanks for this course, Carolyn. I never could have done it without you or whatever, right? And of course, obviously, you can't do this with therapy clients, right? So this is not for when you're selling your intensives. Even if someone gives you permission, that's against my code of ethics, and it probably is against yours as well. But if you're talking about another product, or even like a freebie on your website, or like a blog post that people liked or something, make sure you put, like, if you have any proof like that, that's a great thing to put in your stories. And one last thing, don't just use your stories to repost other people's stuff. Like I do that occasionally if it's something I really, really like, I'll repost it, but primarily my stories are my stuff that I'm talking about. On my personal Instagram, I repost lots of stuff just because I'm more interested, like, I'm talking about personal stuff and those are my friends and family and it's not business. But on my business Instagram, stories are about building more trust and stronger selling relationships. So I don't want to distract with lots of other people's stuff getting reposted and driving people away from my stories to look at something else, right? Okay, so I think I'll stop there for today. Just some off the cuff thoughts on Instagram stories. And yeah, I just, because today is the day really when TikTok has gone down and I've been seeing a lot of people talk about it. If you're mourning the loss of TikTok, that makes total sense. Like I would feel totally bereft if Instagram suddenly disappeared. It's a reminder that being business owners requires us to be flexible and innovative, and that's really hard. Um, if Instagram isn't something you've been using, maybe you did use TikTok and you want some support in using Instagram with your business, like your therapy intensive practice, I'm happy to talk about that. Like I said, I've added more content to my group course this time around about Instagram stories. So you still have you still have time to sign up if this is sounding compelling. Um, yeah, no, I know I'm always kind of messy on the podcast, so my stories are just an additional extension of that. Um, as always, I appreciate your support. Next week, I think I'm going to talk some about lessons learned from my recent launching of my group program, which if any of you who are considering launching a non-therapy product might be interested in. And I'm going to have some juicy and vulnerable details in there. So I hope you tune into that. And I hope all of you are making it through January, which can feel like a very long month, making it through relatively intact. And I know it's been a difficult week here in the US for lots of us with the inauguration and the TikTok going away. So lots of stuff that's been hard. So I see you all. I hope you're taking good care of yourselves, and I will talk to you soon. Have a good week, everyone.